Nirvana and Led Zeppelin are two of the most influential bands of all time, and, interestingly, there are some direct connections between the two bands. Dave Grohl of Nirvana, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, along with Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age, formed a band in 2009 called Them Crooked Vultures. Their song, New Fang, won the Grammy Award for Best Hard Rock Performance in 2011, though the band has been on hiatus since 2010. In 2019, Jimmy Page posted on his Facebook page that he could have also been part of Them Crooked Vultures based on conversations he had had with Dave Grohl. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant's 1998 album Walking into Clarksdale was engineered by Steve Albini. Steve Albini, of course, having produced Nirvana's final studio record, In Utero. As per Kurt Cobain, he himself was a fan of Led Zeppelin, and Nirvana did cover Led Zeppelin multiple times. Some of the Led Zeppelin songs Nirvana covered include Immigrant Song, Dazed and Confused, Moby Dick, and How Many More Times. This shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise, considering the first song Kurt Cobain wanted to learn on guitar was Stairway to Heaven, at least according to Kurt's first guitar teacher from Aberdeen, though Kurt denied this, partly because a huge stadium band like Led Zeppelin was often regarded as the antithesis of underground punk. An early song that Kurt Cobain wrote is Aero Zeppelin, a song dealing with Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin. Aero Zeppelin was one of the songs Nirvana recorded during their first ever recording session with producer Jack Endino on January 23, 1988, and it was later released on Nirvana's 1992 compilation record, Incesticide. Both bands are arguably the definitive musical acts of their respective decades, the 70s and the 90s, though both bands released their first records in the previous decades. What I mean by that is, although Led Zeppelin is a 70s icon, they released their first record in 1969. And same with Nirvana. Nirvana is a 90s icon, yet they released their first record in 1989. Which band do you think is more influential? In this video, I'm going to show you some of the interviews I've done where different artists and music industry people discuss some of the musical foundations for both Led Zeppelin and Nirvana, and how each of those bands composed music. If you like Led Zeppelin, if you like Nirvana, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Everything on this channel is original and I'm the one doing the interviews. Thank you for watching.
Pentatonic.
The pentatonic scale is the foundation of the classic rock sound, exemplified by bands such as Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin.
If you hear anyone from Stevie Ray Vaughan, Muddy Waters to B.B. King, there is that pentatonic sound of that scale, which is in essence what blues is. Anyone, my dad or my grandmother, would hear a note and go, well, that sounds bluesy, and that is that essence. So I think even when you're talking about a band like Rush, Led Zeppelin to Yngwie Malmsteen, when those guys start to shred, they are still in that box of that pentatonic world that is in essence the blues scale and the foundation of blues music.
Well, if you look at those bands that you just mentioned, say Zeppelin, and go back a little bit further from Zeppelin to the Yardbirds, to the Stones, even to the Beatles and the Kinks, this is where the rock thing, the hard rock thing that you're talking about began. And it was born out of the blues. Without Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters, for instance, Led Zeppelin wouldn't have had some of their biggest hits. The Rolling Stones might not have had not only their hits, but the name of their band. The Rolling Stones came from a song that was popular from Muddy Waters, his song, Rolling Stone. Their song, Satisfaction, was basically a reworking of his theme, I Can't Be Satisfied. Rock came out of the blues. It came directly out of the blues.
The blues influenced everybody in rock and roll, without question. It gave the electric guitar with distortion a blues feel. It gave Eric Clapton the ability to hit a note and make it sing. And it gave all the vocalists something to work from.
Something like that. How does that go? That
one. The single biggest foundation is the blues, and in particular, the pentatonic scale.
Well, your basic blues minor pentatonic scale would be the root, the minor third, the fourth, the fifth, and then the seventh, flat seven.
Why don't you show me?
I hate that guitar. All right, classic rock is never played on a nylon string guitar, but since our illustrious documentary man owns one, here's your A pentatonic scale. I made it sound a little more interesting than it is, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes, and here's your octave, which is not considered an extra note in the scale. So there you go.
And that's the pentatonic scale, essentially.
Yes.
So that's the root of classic rock, you could argue, essentially, right?
Yes, especially this, when you do it up an octave and then you fool around with it, but I refuse to do that on this guitar because the strings feel like worms.
If you think about Led Zeppelin as kind of being one of the jumping off points for what hard rock and heavy metal sort of, I think if you ask a lot of heavy metal guys who their band is, Zeppelin is kind of the gateway to that. And early Zeppelin is very much aligned with very hard electric blues that was happening. So for me, the correlation between someone like a Howling Wolf would be, it's a small step from someone like that who was playing a very aggressive form of electric blues to where you're talking about early Led Zeppelin. They were the guys that took it, made it harder, made it louder. The amps were bigger, but in essence, the sound was still American blues music. If you start looking at the solos that those guys are playing and the construct of what they're doing, there's something called a blues scale, which is a flat 3 and a flat 5 of the chord progression, the notes that make up what anyone, my dad or my grandmother, would hear a note and go, well, that sounds bluesy, and that is that essence.
An artist like Eric Clapton, who was so influenced by the blues, and Led Zeppelin as well, understand the direct relationship between the blues and the music that they played, even as they evolved and developed and played rock music. That music became classic rock. The population of people who grew up with the music that was so blues infused, like Clapton's music, continue to live to this day. That's a reality. We're not getting rid of them. I like them. I'm one of them. But here's what that means. Classic rock radio realized that there was a group with spending power who were interested in the music, who would listen to their radio stations, and who would perpetuate and keep this music going as long as they possibly could. They would influence their kids. So you'll find that the kids of this particular age group are very much into this kind of music. Daniel, I know this has affected you as well, which explains exactly why you're doing this film in the first place. There is that strong influence. There isn't a kid who picks up a guitar or tries out those 3 chords on the piano at some point who isn't reflecting something that came from a generation before. Such a powerful culture. There are some people who don't like the fact that they're so powerful. They think that they've taken over everything, and everywhere you turn it's about stuff remembering the 60s and the 70s. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're talking about the foundation of popular music and that direct relationship between the music and blues that was the foundation. How can that possibly be a bad thing? So whether it's Eric Clapton, Zeppelin, or Pink Floyd, these are the blues-based popular rock musicians who carried the music for. They saw it evolve, of course, but you can find a direct line between the foundation of blues and the music that they became so popular for.
Van Halen became famous in the 70s, late 70s, it was Eddie Van Halen, who really just took Eric Clapton and just pushed it to another level. That's the way I see Eddie. And I always feel like he's also a hero to me, because I feel like here's a guy that really gets what inspired me, but then he made it his own and brought it up a notch. It's not that he made it better, but he made it kind of like faster and more, intense. Yeah, kind of on steroids. Like I look at him like, he's the souped up muscle car version of Eric Clapton, And it wasn't surprising to me when not too long ago I saw some of the guitar press show him playing in an early interview, note for note, Crossroads from Cream, in a hotel room with an interview. And it had Eddie's phrasing, but it was like, it was as if that's all he listened to was Eric Clapton for quite a few years, and I always had that kind of respect for him anyway. I didn't need to hear that to know, But you see how it's all connected. Everyone seems to be, influenced by someone and maybe takes that and makes it their own.
I always felt like another band that I didn't mention that I do feel is classic rock, even though
I guess they started to get popular right when the punk thing was Van Halen. And, you know, here's a guy taking lead guitar and the Guitar Hero and supercharging it like a, you know, a souped up, you know, street racer, you know. And he scared the hell out of me because I'm like, I didn't know what he was doing. Yet I could tell that his diet of guitar music was definitely people that changed my world, like Eric Clapton. So I really feel like Van Halen was another part of that, taking the roots of classic rock. I know Michael Anthony loved Grand Funk. And then you have Eddie talking about Eric Clapton. So you're taking my heroes, you know, and people in those really, truly classic rock bands, and then just doing it one step up or something, or taking it to another level that really resonated. There's no doubt.
If you're talking about rock, regardless of what stage of rock music you're talking about, whether it's the early days of Chuck Berry or whether you're talking about Metallica and everything that happened in between there, blues is the foundation of that music in every way. So for me, blues is the foundation of jazz, blues is the foundation of rock. Western music comes from blues, and it comes from those chord structures, that rhythm, and in a lot of ways lyrically, the things they were touching on with blues are what a lot of the lyrics of a lot of hard rock and music came after that. So I would think you cannot have hard rock without blues. It's a no-brainer.
Is Zeppelin a metal band? Or is Zeppelin just a rock band? Or is they a hybrid rock metal band? I mean, they do folk songs, so therefore, how much metal could they be if half the songs are done with acoustic guitars? Are they metal because John Bonham, you know, had that massive drum sound? I guess one can argue this point over and over again. The earlier metal bands tended, not always, because Sabbath certainly didn't do a ballad in the early days, nor did they use an acoustic guitar, but they tended to have some variety. I think once the line was crossed into Slade territory, the band Slade purely celebrated super heavy, loud rock. I mean, Slade was rock and roll, but metal. I mean, super, super loud, like heavy duty loud, like grindingly, punishingly, rebelliously, insanely loud. What's the difference in them and Motorhead? They were funny. They wrote much more hooky type songs, but if you ask Lemmy and Noddy Holder, they'd probably have mutual respect for each other for what they both did. Motorhead just kind of took it over the line in another direction that maybe have assumed to be heavier, but I don't know if they were any louder. Not if you actually compared the two's SPL levels, or Deep Purple for that matter, who I think hold the record for the loudest band on earth. They wouldn't be rolling off your tongue as a metal band. Deep Purple would be a hard rock band. You'll get people arguing this point.
Is it when they start stripping away the blues element to it? Where do you start to distinguish what's metal and what's hard rock?
Well, Sabbath still had the blues, and they were heavy as hell. You know,
they really did something. Something about their tone. Black Sabbath had a more preponderance in the forwardness of all their tones. Right, everything was pushed a lot more forward than even Led Zeppelin of the time. Right, Led Zeppelin had. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe like that kind of bombastic assault that Led Zeppelin had musically, but it was, you know, it certainly was a little more demure as opposed to listening to the dual overdubs and tuned down sound like Tommy Iommi,
exactly.
Right? I think it had more to do with tonality in that case. I think eventually, you know, just like all the old blues, you know, all the blues rockers that we love, like Led Zeppelin, you know, borrowed from Jimi Hendrix and borrowed from this guy and that guy. I think the same thing happened certainly with heavy metal, in that they kind of picked and chose what they liked.
We played probably the Texas International Pop Fest. We played 2 weeks after Woodstock. It was a pretty huge thing, but not as big as Woodstock. And Led Zepp was on that bill, but the people there didn't understand them. They didn't get them, didn't really understand what they were doing. And it took a while for them to get going. And that was a different thing. Musicians look up to Led Zepp and go crazy and all that sort of stuff. But general public, I don't even know if they would look at them as highly regarded as the Beatles in terms of what the Beatles did.
A song like Stairway to Heaven, in the beginning intro of it, there's a, you know, that descending line, and you know, at some point it falls into an F major 7th chord, which essentially is a jazz chord, right? So there's the harmonic influence of jazz in a song like Stairway to Heaven, which is sort of a song that everyone knows. The basic structure of a chord, let's say a major chord, C major chord, is root 3rd and 5th. But in jazz, a chord is hardly played that way. There's always some kind of an extension, whether it's the major 7th or the 9th, depending on the context and where it fits. Stairway to Heaven. I think 20, 30, 40 years from now, if you play guitar, you're gonna have to learn that song or you'll know about that song. Blues influenced jazz. Blues has also influenced rock. So some musicians have taken more from the blues as opposed to jazz, and some musicians have taken more from jazz than the blues. So I think it's really dependent on the artist and what they've done with what they feel and what they've been influenced by. To give you an example would be, you know, the jazz rock movement, right? I mean, how that started, you know, is jazz just swing? Is it triplets? Or is jazz when you're improvising? Okay, well, in folk music, there's improvisation. So is that jazz also? Did folk music influence jazz? If you listen to music from different eras, some of it is made up from influences from, you know, a generation behind it, also influenced by what's happening that day, whether it's what's happening in society, what's happening in humanity. And I think it's a combination of all of these things, and some things that we can't really put words to it. So I think it's based on many things as opposed to one major thing.
Well, Nirvana had crappy musicianship according to like the professionals, but they wrote amazing songs, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, aside from Dave Grohl, like, you know, whenever Kurt Cobain was playing on the guitar, it seemed like anybody could play that. Mm-hmm. And same, yeah, that's one of the reasons why it worked. But when you look into Nirvana deeply, you realize that most of the complexity was in the actual lyrics, which was something that nobody could do, like Kurt Cobain. Nobody could write like him, or even write such great songs that were.
I think it was songs. Yeah, I don't think it was just one thing you could sing. But you also had Dave Grohl was the best drummer in the fucking world. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. I think pop music has always been there. Rock music has always been there, and there's always been this kind of weight and balance where one outdoes the other. And unfortunately, the scale has just been tipped a little too heavy to one side at this point.
Like, I like Nirvana, I like Pink Floyd, I like The Doors, because if you listen to that music, there's a story there. They're talking about their emotions and their feelings, and I feel like today with everything, it's just, look at my car, look at this. It's like, that's it. That's all you hear on the radio. Yeah. It's just like, I can't relate to that, you know?
Everything has become an advertising sales pitch, and, you know, that's even the way that people approach art now. And for me personally, in my art, it drives me crazy. Because it's like they want you to synopsize what you're doing in 5 seconds. Well, it's like sometimes art takes a while to, like, get to the point, you know? It's like you should be able to work through it, like spend a few years working on it if it's something that's important to you. And see, that's the beauty of the music that happened here in Seattle in the Northwest, was it wasn't formulaic because we were off the beaten path. So it got, like, germinated in a way that was, like, outside of the mainstream. Like, in some ways, we were rebelling about what the music industry was doing in Los Angeles because, you know, right then, that was the big hair spandex metal. And we thought that was all a bunch of crap. And we were all, you know, Nirvana and all that, they might label it grunge now, but it was really punk rock. It's always really been punk rock. Like, we all identified as punk rockers. We were all punk rockers.
What is the punk rock mentality exactly?
The punk rock mentality is make your own fun, make your own creativity, rebellion, and also all the soft, sensitive kids that were getting beat up at home. Because a lot of the original punk rockers, like all my friends, either had moms that died when they were young, moms that had, like, personality disorders, you know, or they were getting beat up at home, or their parents divorced when they were young, and they just were not getting the support.
Nirvana was just kind of rebelling against, like,
being a kid, like, you know,
like,
yeah.
but what being a kid at that point was, which was like
just angry.
Yeah, but the other, everybody else was into Guns N' Roses and Poison and classic rock and like TNA, and Nirvana didn't want bling, and they didn't like the kind of like that glam rock era was kind of like it was all about just making money and partying, and there was nothing serious about it. And Nirvana was like, this is all stupid, like we're rebelling against that attitude.
The standard of music that is promoted is not a high quality, originally creative. It's like about polishing yourself and being like a star, like you're created. And that is not about writing good music. No like life-changing music, I don't think, is ever going to come out of those.
So if Nirvana was around today, like or specifically Kurt, do you think, like, how, obviously there's no way we could know for sure, but how would this Instagram, Facebook culture have affected him and his art? Do you think it would have changed who he was a little bit?
Well, I think it's changed all of us. So, yeah, I don't think if you live in the modern world you can help but have it changed. I was talking to a friend a couple of weeks ago, and he said he went back, his family is from East Africa, and he went back to visit, and he said that it was so different there because everyone doesn't have a cell phone, and so people actually talk to each other and communicate in a way that just doesn't happen in the United States right now.
Who was he like as a person? What was he really like?
Well, I mean, he was like a lot of other guys that I knew in the scene here. Kind of sensitive, you know, really interested in his art, really super passionate, had a lot of really specific ideas about stuff. Yes!
I'm optimistic. I'm excited. We are still a touring rock band. We get to go around the world, and there are people there who are having fun, who care, and want that experience, want that, you know, that connection. And we hope that, I think the best feeling in the entire world, for myself personally, is like when you have kids come up to you after a show or via the internet and say, like, hey, I picked up a guitar because Ian DeSaw is my favorite guitar player. So cool. I saw him, and now I want to do that. Or I want to be a drummer. Or, hey, I'm a singer. Or, you know, to inspire someone to pick up something that potentially will become an outlet for them for the rest of their lives.
Or be creative in general.
It's just a beautiful, that's the most important thing for us as a band, is
Wonderful.
To connect.
One time when I ran into him when he was famous, he was telling me about the video that they made for In Bloom and how they got the old film footage left over from the 60s, and they got the same camera that they used to film the Ed Sullivan Show, and they had like all these details, like they were all working in his mind, like he was creating this image, he had this idea about what he wanted to do, and it was really fantastic. You know, that's why I liked him, was because like every time we would hang out, we would sit down and have these big conversations about ideas and different things. Easily amused. I think that was about what I was telling Kurt, because my mom used to have me just take care of myself because she was an artist, so she'd be like, here's a sketch pad and some pencils, just take care of yourself, you know, like, so I was always like, I've always been easily amused, like I can go anywhere and just sit around and enjoy looking at things, and like that was the conversation, and I think that's where that phrase easily amused came from. And
that's cool.
You know, so it's taken me years to sort of remember and figure that out, but I think all the Nirvana songs are like that. There's like little pieces about like different things that happen, and so a lot of them are about, like, they're all from his journals that were written when he lived in Olympia and he was in the middle of that creative milieu. The beauty of what happened in the Northwest was we were isolated, so, you know, if everyone would have been trying to get a record label in Los Angeles when they were first starting out, maybe they would have been more homogenous. But here, everybody got to do their own thing because it was a punk rock standard. So we were basing all our stuff off of like punk rock from like 10 years before, like in the 70s. Like what was going on in England, what was going on in New York, what was going on in LA, you know, and so there were always influences in Seattle because of that.
Rock is a different aesthetic, and at times it becomes popular. usually when there's a rock band that's very good at writing a pop song, which was what Nirvana did, you know, I mean, people still want verses and choruses and bridges and hooks. And if rock bands deliver that, they can become popular. If the aesthetic is not going in that direction, then it's going to be more niche. And that's just how popular music has worked for decades and decades. So, that's the funny thing. Nobody really accused Nirvana of selling out. Kurt was very sensitive to that. But they were a great pop band. Guns N' Roses, pop songs. Jane's Addiction, pop songs. Pearl Jam, you know, their hits, the big hits they've had, they're written as pop songs.
I find that pop has a connotation to it, though, in a sense of like those may be pop's like influence with rock and roll, but like they're still playing their instruments. They're still really singing. I feel like when people think of pop music today, it's more like the autotune kind of stuff.
It is. It's more the common kind of pop music that rules the charts, and that the major labels are more interested in promoting and signing is manufactured for the most part. It's made by committee. It's made electronically. That's not to say that there's not real talent involved. This is real music with real talent and real producers who know what the hell they're doing. But it's just a completely different kind of art. It's a different artistic impulse. It's a different style. It's a different genre. It's just, you know, there's no guitars. There's no real drums. It's not so much focused on a live performing unit. It's not focused on bands, you know, and a band is really one small part of the music world. The whole thing with rock is focused on bands and live performers playing real instruments. And that's a niche at this point. It's a big niche, and it's never going to go away as long as people want to play those instruments and scream and yell. But that's, once again, it's a niche.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.